Well, okay. Don't forget to make use of the question box there, just in case you have any questions about the Bible or anything we talk about or anything like that. We have up to this point gotten through all of Revelation 1, which is like a prologue, and gotten through the first 5 of the 7 churches. And today we're going to do probably the most well-known of the churches. If you spend any amount of time in the church, you probably have heard the letter to Laodicea at least 500 times. So hopefully we'll help you understand that a little bit better. So today we'll be looking through the rest of chapter 3, and then next week we'll be able to start into chapter 4. So can I have somebody who is willing to read the first of the churches we're looking at, which is Philadelphia, verses 7 through 13.
To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, These are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens no one can shut, and what he shuts no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door, that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word, and have not denied my name. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet, and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have, so that no one will take your crown. The one who is victorious I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
So Philadelphia, the main idea of this letter is basically that they've been obedient and faithful. Like he doesn't have anything bad to say. In fact, out of all the letters, this is probably the most what's it called? Not encouraging. That's not the right word, but the most positive, in its feedback. So a little bit about Philadelphia. That's going to be a little bit more relevant later on, and I'll bring it back up again later. But Philadelphia had a lot of frequent earthquakes. Even at one point, it was destroyed by an earthquake. So that doesn't sound like a pleasant place to live for me. I'm not a big fan of earthquakes. I grew up in California though, so it's a little bit like I've been there, done that. I'm over it. Let's move on. And so what people would do in Philadelphia is they would either live outside the city, like the city walls, or if an earthquake started to hit, they just kind of do a real quick evacuation, let it do whatever it's going to do, and then go back to see what the situation is when they're done. That's going to come up later on in this letter. The second thing is it says here in verse, I think it was like around 7. Yeah, thus is the Holy One, the true one, the one who has the key of David, right there. Who opens and no one will close, and who closes and no one opens. So there's a lot of things going on here that have a lot of Jewish import to basically say that he is the Messiah. But something I want to focus in on here is where it says the key of David, or the keys of David. The idea here is actually from Isaiah 22, around like verse 20, 25, somewhere in there. It's going to talk about how there was this kind of like secretary, like a helper to the king, who was not doing his job, and so the keys were handed to this other guy. And this is referencing that chapter in Isaiah. So the long and short of the idea of the keys of David is it's the keys that the king has that opens whatever he wants to open, and obviously whoever he wants to have it for. So the idea there being that the king can open whatever door in his kingdom that he wants. And so if he opens it, then surely nobody else can shut it because he's got the keys. He's the king of the roost. Anyways, something I do want to point out is that although this letter to Philadelphia is more positive than the one to Smyrna was, we shouldn't get the idea that they were better than Smyrna. It's just that for whatever reason, this one, and I'll mention this here in just a second, this one got more blessings than Smyrna did. It's just the way that the day goes sometimes, you know. As far as the church itself in Philadelphia, this was, you know, an insignificant church. It was small. It wasn't really a powerhouse. You know, this isn't like a church on the move kind of situation. This is just a small church. You know, so they seem kind of insignificant, and yet this insignificant church is very great in God's eyes. And so you have here, he goes with this, and where he says, "I know your works. Look, I have." I missed my line here. I have placed before you an open door that no one can close because you have but little power, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Note this, I will make those from the sin. And then he goes on like that. We'll continue on there in just a second. So it's important here that to see here, he gave them more opportunity because of what they had done with the opportunity that they already had. You see where he says here in verse 8, I know your works. Look, I have placed before you an open door that no one can close because you have but little power, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. So they had the opportunity that God gave them. God gave them more opportunity through that. And so I just thought that was an encouraging word for smaller churches, because it's not look what we can't do. It's look what we can do. You know, so here's this small church that just, you know, they're nothing by the world's eyes, and yet, you know, here they are being praised very highly, more than any of the other 6 churches, and that's just, you know, I thought that was really encouraging. Now it is a lot. I know I already mentioned the letter to Smyrna. This church is a lot similar to the one in Smyrna, even having the same kind of idea going on about the whole Church of Satan thing, the synagogue of Satan thing. And you see a lot of similarities there. But the biggest issue between them is that Smyrna is going to have to go. God is impressed with them. You guys are doing great, but you have a lot of persecution coming. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, you guys are doing great, and there's no persecution coming there. In fact, for them, he seems to imply the opposite, that, hey, you guys are actually going to be scot-free when things go bad. You're going to be preserved through that. And Smyrna didn't get that in their letter. And obviously, like I say, that's not because Smyrna did anything wrong. There was no reason given why this is the case, but he didn't have anything bad to say about either group. The idea here, though, is that we don't really know, and God leads as he wills. So we get to verse 10, and it seems like this is kind of a really important verse here. He says, because you have kept my command to endure, I will also keep you from the hour of testing that is going to come on the whole world to test those who live on the earth. So now we have a couple of questions we need to ask. The first thing we need to, when we're looking at this, what did I do here? Why did it do that? Okay, I don't know why I did that. Anyways, is verse 10 here. Yeah. It says here that they will be kept from. Because you have kept my command to endure, I will also keep you from the hour of testing. What does that actually mean? So there's a few questions we need to ask. First off, is this something that he is a promise he's giving to all the churches or just the church at Philadelphia? Because there's been numerous situations where the thing that he says is a blessing for the church is technically for all the churches, such as them having white robes. That's something for all the churches. So is this something that is for all the churches, or is it specific to Philadelphia? The second thing to note isn't a question, it's just something I want to point out before we get to the next question. It says here that I will also keep you from the hour of testing that is going to come on the whole world. So I've heard some teachers talk about the way that this is something that's going to happen to the Philadelphian community. No, it was very clear that it's going to come on the whole world. Whatever he's talking about is going to be not just for them. Now, I do want to also specify that when it says the whole world, there's very common usage to not literally be talking about the whole world, but all the Roman Empire. That was referred to as the whole world. So you don't come to a rash conclusion if he means this or that. It could mean either thing. So let's move on to question number 2. And that's where he says the time of trial. When is that? Is this the time before the coming of Jesus, so the stuff that he's going to get to in the rest of the letter? Scholars such as Bill Mounce would decide on that. Or is it B, is it the coming Roman persecution of the first century that's going to cover the whole Roman Empire? And ultimately, both of those are fully possible. He could be talking about something that's happening in the Roman Empire that's happening in the first century. This context, we already know, for instance, the persecution under Emperor Domitian. And so he could be saying, look, this is going to affect everybody in the whole Roman Empire, just you guys are going to be preserved through that. Or is he saying that this is something that's going to happen before Jesus' return, when all these things are happening throughout the rest of the book? And so you could really go back and forth on this, and scholars have filled books and books, and I'm not going to waste your time on any of that. But it is worth mentioning that church is not there today, and Jesus has not returned yet. So that might have something to do with it. It's also worth mentioning that this church survived the longest out of all 7 of the churches of Revelation. It didn't stop being a thing until the year 1392. So a couple of other churches, for instance, had been destroyed with the Islamic conquests, and this one was not. So, I mean, that could be coincidence. I side on the idea that it probably isn't coincidence because he said this. So you take it for whatever it is. The third question that is worth mentioning is when it says here in verse, let's see, we're on 10. I will also keep you from the hour. When he says keep you, is he saying I'm going to preserve you through it? I'm going to be there with you, and you're going to go through this. I'm going to be with you, and you're not going to. I'm going to get you through this rough situation. Or is he saying I'm going to keep you from, and the idea of not being present for it? In other words, like the rapture. Now, you might think, oh, well, that's pretty obvious. But actually, it's absolutely not very obvious, because in the Greek it really does allow for either. And you can hear people talk in circles one way or the other, and. They haven't gotten anywhere, so I'm not going to try and step in and say, well, I have all the answers. But I am going to offer some suggestions here. I'm going to suggest that let's narrow it down to 2 ways of understanding this. That this promise that they're going to be preserved through it is just for the Philadelphian church, and that time of the trial was in the first century, and by preserved through it, he means he will preserve them through the process. The second big understanding is that it is for all the churches, the time of the trial is going to be before Jesus returns, so after they go through all this thing of the church, the trial of the tribulations, and then it's going to be that they will be removed, the rapture. So, my personal take on this, especially when you compare it with the rest of Scripture and the rest of even the book of Romans, it doesn't seem like he's talking about removing them from the problem where they don't have to go through it. Because when we get just a couple chapters later, I think it's chapter 6, he's talking about all the different people who die in the martyrdom. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if he's saying you're going to be preserved through it, if in the next couple chapters he's talking about how a bunch of them are dying. My takeaway from this is that he's talking about this is very specific to that church. They will be preserved through this. The Philadelphian church will be preserved through this. And he's talking about something that happened then. That's my take on it. Like I say, I'm not trying to, you take whatever you want with that. So then in verse 11, he goes on to talk about, I'm coming soon, so hold on to what you have. And the basic idea there is just, hey, you guys are doing great. Don't stop now. Keep going. Then we get to verses 12 through 13, and he says this about the pillar, which sounds a little bit weird because remember that there is no temple in the heavenly city. In the New Jerusalem, there's no temple. It says there's no temple there because the Lord himself is there, right? This whole thing is going to be over in chapter 21. But he says this in verse 12. He says, the one who conquers, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will never go out again. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God and my new name. So right here, there's a few things that are very, very important, contextually speaking, and so let's try to break them down. Okay, so first thing, and I already mentioned this, is that there is no temple in the New Jerusalem. So he's not talking about how they will be a literal pillar. I mean, I seem to recall with the whole Sodom and Gomorrah thing being turned into a pillar was a bad thing. So in this, he's not talking in literal terms. He's talking in a metaphor. And the metaphor is this: you're going to be a part of the kingdom. That's long and short of it, because there's not going to be an actual temple there. So there's a few things that I want to point out here. You'll remember that I started this off by saying Philadelphia has a bunch of earthquakes. Okay, this is where I'm going to start tying those things in. So when there were earthquakes, remember how I said that they would evacuate if they were inside the city, they'd go out of the city. Well, here, instead of them going out of the city, he says here very clearly, you're going to be a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will never go out again. You won't have to leave the city again. Your place is going to be firm and secure. So that's the first thing, is that they will never have to go out again. They're firm from the disturbances that are going on, because when you had earthquakes, the pillars were most often the part of the building that was left standing the longest. So if there was going to be something left standing, it was going to be the pillars. Then next up, he goes here to say, the one who conquers, I'm going to make him a pillar in the temple of my God, so he's going to be firm, and he will never go out again, so he won't have to run away from the problems. I will write on him the name of my God. Now, right here, where does that come in? Well, so they had different named pillars. I know that sounds silly, but it is actually a thing. They had named pillars. It was basically a way of giving honor to different people, like maybe a priest, for instance. So you know how you go into like maybe some churches or whatever, and they'll have like a plaque for a certain person that like donated a lot of money or something like that. That is kind of an idea here. A pillar could be named after one of these people who had honor that they wanted to show to them. So in other words, here he's saying, I'm going to write my name on you, being the pillar, and basically giving recognition to a very insignificant church, which, once again, how encouraging. We're this small church. Nobody takes us seriously. And yet, this great promise from God that, hey, we're going to be a pillar, and he's going to write his name on it. This is going to be great. So giving recognition to that, overlooked church. And just how long this letter goes on and this encouraging stuff. And then the third thing to mention about that is Philadelphia underwent a lot of name changes throughout its history. One time it was destroyed by a... am I thinking of the right thing? No, I don't think I am. But one time, I believe they were destroyed by an earthquake on that one, and they were rebuilt, and so they were named, Philadelphia was named something. It was like Neo-Caesarea or something like that. It was also called Flavia. It also had some other name, I forgot. Anyways, Philadelphia went through a lot of different name changes. That's what I'm getting at here. And so here it says, I will never erase, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong verse right here. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from God, and my new name. And so obviously this is something that would have, be a lot of encouragement to them that they are going to be identified with Christ, not the emperor. Neo-Caesarea, that's being connected with the emperor. They're not going to be connected with the emperor, they're going to be connected with God. Now there is a misconception I want to kind of hit on. That I've unfortunately heard as a pastor. Maybe this is new to you and you're going to be like, well, that's crazy. But maybe it's going to be something that you have thought before. And that's this misconception that I've heard where people think that if they are too righteous, God is going to despise them. And so whenever I hear people bring this up, they bring as proof that part in Ecclesiastes where it says, don't be too righteous, lest God cut your years short, and don't be too wicked, lest you, sin against the Lord, or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's, once again, this is off the top of my head, and I haven't read Ecclesiastes this year. But it says something like that. And to that, you can take that idea of, okay, is that true that God despises people who are too righteous? Well, you get through a section like this, where he's talking to this place, and he's like, look, you've done so great. I will make those from the synagogue of Satan, they're going to bow before you. You have kept my command to endure. He's just talking about them and blessing them, and they're doing you guys are doing everything right. So if we take this verse, obviously it doesn't align with that idea that, God despises people who are too righteous. And another variation of this same thing that I've heard from people. And the reason why I bring this up is because you never know when somebody's, struggling in their inner thoughts with trusting the Lord. And so I just want to hit this just in case there's somebody who has this in their head. If I trust God and obey him, he's going to make me do something I don't want to do. He's going to call me somewhere I don't want to go. He will put me in a bad position, something like that. And I don't know, maybe he will. But it's not a definite thing that he will, though. And I think that letters or sections of the Bible like this definitely affirm that kind of thought that, that's kind of just one of those tricks of the enemy that, God's not going to curse you for being righteous and for obeying him and trusting him. That's just not how it goes. You might go through some trials and whatnot, but God's not going to hate you or despise you. So any questions about the church to Philadelphia? Letter to Philadelphia. No? It takes us to Revelation 3:14 through 22. That is the letter to Laodicea. Anybody want to have a go at this? So you, Chris, you got signed up.
And to the angel of the church in Laodicea write, the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation. I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So, because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white garments, so that you may clothe yourself, and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen, and salve to anoint your eyes, so that you may see. Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline, so be zealous and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and eat with him, and he with me. The one who conquers, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne, as I also conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
So now we get to probably the most well-known letter in Revelation, and probably the harshest. I feel like that part on Arrested Development. Well, nobody's going to beat that. Grace? Okay, so the church the church in Laodicea. That's what I'm trying to say. Long and short, they're undrinkable and useless. Yeesh, rough going. That's not something you want put in your memoirs. Obviously, this letter is probably the most overused by evangelists, and I think that the reason by it is because it's such an easy like the way it's written just flows so well that it's just one of those things that it's so easy to use it, and it's easy to get people fired up over this one or feeling guilty or feeling nervous. And I feel like a lot of times I've heard different evangelists use this, and they have this idea that if I can get goosebumps or other people can get goosebumps, it's got to be from God. And so this is just anointed. And my problem with hearing evangelists say this kind of stuff is because all of Revelation is anointed. Like you can't take out one letter because you really feel like it, gets people fired up, and then say this is more anointed than the other 6 letters. Like that's just. I think that sometimes I think that people try to preach for a reaction instead of trying to preach the word. And so I want you to try to take all the stuff that you might have heard from different evangelists in this letter and just kind of put it in the back. We're going to try to look with fresh eyes. The first thing about the church in Laodicea that is very important for this is Laodicea was a very, very wealthy place. So they actually had one time when they were destroyed by an earthquake, and Rome normally would, pay for repairs and stuff, and they didn't need no Roman, that is, and so they had so much wealth that they just fixed it themselves, and I don't know, I'm one of those people that's like, hey, I got the money for it, but if you want to pay for it, go for it. But I guess that's just me. I'm getting a little bit more penny pincher. But as far as the city of Laodicea, they were known for a couple different things. The first thing they were known for was they had a school of medicine. And it's really funny. This is going to come up later in this letter. But they actually had this salve. It was called the Phrygian powder. Phrygian is the area, Phrygia. And so this Phrygian powder, they used it for the eyes. It was an ointment for the eyes. People would actually travel there to get this ointment. They also had some other things like this ear, not a potion, but kind of like an ointment stuff. But the thing that they were really known for there was a school of medicine. They had a lot of different stuff trade-wise. In fact, there's a lot of, let's not get too off topic, but they had a lot of really valuable trade going on with wool and whatnot. But as far as when we look at the city itself, it's hard to see anything that makes them unique. Yeah, they were rich, but they really didn't have anything unique. You have bland, mediocre city of bland people. They had no achievements. So you couldn't say, oh, Laodicea, that's where such and such happened. No, it was Laodicea, that's a rich place. That's it. Like, that's all that they had going for them. You didn't have people zealous for anything in Laodicea. That's Ramsey's wording there. Another problem with the city of Laodicea is they had no water. They had no access to water. So they had what was called the 6-mile aqueduct. That's what it is. And so basically they had two sources of water that they had to basically flow in. The one was off of a mountain, which was very cold when it was there. But by the time that it got to the city, it was very lukewarm. Then there was also a series of hot springs that they could bring water in from there. But once again, by the time that the hot water got to the city of Laodicea, it was very lukewarm. So you have in Laodicea just unpleasant water experience. Like, what are you going to do with lukewarm water? You can't have hot tea. You can't have iced tea. Like, what are you even doing with this? So then we get to verse 15 through 16. Okay, so he starts off trying to the letter, and then verse 15 he says, I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot, which would have been a powerful impact for them. They would have totally understood the imagery here. I wish that you were cold or hot. So, because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I'm going to vomit you out of my mouth. So, pleasant imagery, I know, but the thing that I want you to not miss is something that I have heard mispreached so many different times. And that's that being hot and being cold are both said to be a good thing. I know when you hear pastors preach, a lot of times they talk about being on fire for God. Well, it's not actually being on fire at all. It's talking about the hot spring. So don't mix your metaphors there. Second thing is being hot or being cold. Both of those things are good in this context. And he very clearly says, I wish that you were cold or hot. And then he goes to the next verse to say, you are neither hot nor cold. You're lukewarm, so I'm going to vomit you out. In other words, I'm not going to vomit you out if you're cold or if you're hot. But if you're lukewarm, I'm going to vomit you out. So once again, I know you probably heard this a dozen times about being on fire for God. And, so he doesn't vomit you out of his mouth and all this different stuff. Take all that. I mean, I'm sure they had good intentions with those sermons, but historically it's just not accurate to what's going on here. So now that we've gotten all that out of the way, cold would be more like refreshing, hot is more like calming, but lukewarm, that's gross. You can't do anything with that. Which brings us to the whole problem. Laodicea as a whole, not just the culture, but also the church itself, is just useless. They're not good for anything. Which we're going to get to a very, very scary thing that he's going to say here in just a minute. And I'm just going to read back over that section. No, let's wait. I'll keep going, and then we'll come to that in a minute. So then he goes on to verse 17, and it says, for you say, I'm rich, I've become wealthy and need nothing, and you don't realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. So a lot of things going on there, but some important things that I want to highlight is he contrasts the church, he contrasts the church with the city, showing the opposites of it, how, Laodicea is rich, but they're spiritually poor. But then also, at the same time he's contrasting, he also compares. So you have contrast and comparisons on the same letter. For instance, they had this eye potion, like I said, the ointment stuff that they would put in the eyes. And then he says down here in verse 7, you say I'm rich, I become wealthy and need nothing, and you don't realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. The city that was known for its eye-healing powder stuff would definitely have gotten I guess you could say the metaphor, the not illusion, but reference, the reference here. And unfortunately, like a lot of times when Christians get too prosperous, they're deceived by their wealth and their prosperity. I advise you, in verse 18, I advise you to buy from me gold refined in the fire so that you may be rich, white clothes so you may be dressed on your, dressed, and your shameful nakedness not be exposed, and ointment to spread on your eyes so that you may see. Again, drawing back up the idea of ointment. You're really getting the point across. This is something that they will totally understand what he's saying. There will be no confusion. And, it's just interesting here because, again, these are people who, we don't need anything. We're good. We're fine. Which, unfortunately, I think is a lot of how a lot of people feel in the Western world, be it the UK or here, that, hey, we don't really need anything. We're not suffering, those people over there, they need the aid, but we really don't need anything. We're good. And you can tell how you really feel by, do you make time for God in your schedule? Are you in prayer? Are you in the Word? These kinds of things. If you're hungry, you will eat and you will have enough. If you are not hungry, you won't. See what else? Something else I wanted to mention is oftentimes people don't see their need until they're in a place of suffering. They think that they're fine, their life's going on great, and then something bad happens, like their kid gets some kind of sickness. They go through a divorce, they lose the house, they lose their job, something like that happens, and all of a sudden they realize, hey, we're not as good as we thought we were. And this is one of the good sides of suffering, is you're able to adjust course. So in this letter, he's trying to give them a little bit of a warning before they get there, because obviously, bad times are coming, but then also bad times are going to come for them too. What else? So they need to buy, and what does it mean by buy? It means to build heavenly wealth, like Jesus talks about in Matthew. So now we can move on to verses 19 through 20, and in 19 he says, "As many as I love, I rebuke and discipline. So be zealous and repent." So that takes us to something I wanted to kind of mention, and I mention this a lot, I know, but it's something that really needs to be hammered in just because of the culture we live in, and that's the idea of love. There's this idea in our culture, they define love in our culture as acceptance and support. That is how our culture defines love. So when you're talking to people, a great example of what gets across the point that I'm trying to make. I was listening to an interview, and this gay woman, so a lesbian, was talking to this Christian man, and it came up in the interview that he was Christian. She's like, "Oh, so how do you feel about gays?" And he's like, "I don't agree with it as a lifestyle, but I mean, I love you." And she says, right there, I don't agree with that. That's not possible. It's like, well, isn't it though? I mean, I love my children, but sometimes they're little bandits. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I'm not totally of the same mind with them. I love them to pieces, but man, sometimes they just straighten up. You know what I mean? That's just crazy to me. But our culture defines love like that. So if you start with the basic idea of this is the definition of love, you are already rejecting the biblical definition of tough love. You're already rejecting that aspect of love. So here we get to that, and people in our culture are going to read something like this, and they're going to say, Jesus is not loving. Because he says here, "As many as I love, I rebuke and discipline. So be zealous and repent." This is the point I'm trying to make. That is foundationally at odds with the definition that we see of love around us. What is it that I guess that's a conversation for another day. And then we get to verse 20, and he says, "See, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and eat with him and he with me." So this is the part I really wanted to highlight here, okay? We've heard it said 1 trillion times about people coming to the Lord, right? And how Jesus is knocking at their door. And not that that's not a good thing to say. But once again, that's not what this is saying here. He's not writing to a person. He's writing to a church. And he says that the Lord is at the door of the church, not at an individual's heart. And he's knocking at the church's door for if they will accept him in. In other words, and here's where the harsh bit comes in, Christ is no longer welcome at this church, and he's standing outside of the church, gently knocking to be let back into the church. That's not great. That's not great. So this is something that is for the whole church here. They were no longer in fellowship with God. And I don't want to say this as a way of knocking other believers, but in the area where I lived before this, there was a sizable Catholic population. Once again, this is not a knock on Catholicism or Catholics or anything like that. But in the area that I lived in, they were Catholics in name, but that was it. I mean, they were doing drugs. I mean, maybe they'd go to mass if they had time, but they would just go there and do their thing and then go home and get drunk and, beat their wives and stuff. And it wasn't anything that was like, Christ has really made a difference in my life. Now, once again, that's not a knock on all of Catholics. In the area that I lived in, okay, nobody stole me later. In the area that I lived in, it was a thing where it was about the traditions and all that, but Jesus wasn't really a part of it. It fit this to a T, that there wasn't any actual, relationship with God. There wasn't anything beyond that. It was just, this dead tradition. Jesus, who in essence hasn't changed their life, doesn't influence their choices, and that they don't know. So this is the way he ends this is very telling, because this is the very un-Roman way of doing things. Okay, how the Romans would do something is they would come in busting the doors down and say, "Now you're going to have to house us and feed us. We'll leave in a couple days or whatever." That's how the Romans did things. This is instead how Jesus does things, in contrast to how the Romans did things. "See, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will then come into him and eat with him, and he with me." Totally different from how the Romans did things. So a very, very cool thing there. Gentle knocking versus the rowdy demanding of the Romans. And then he closes off the letter, "To the one who conquers, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I also conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne." This is, once again, a recurring theme of how we will be rulers in the new heavens and the new earth. And then in verse 22, "Let anyone who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit says to the churches." But we've already kind of hit on that. There's something else I want to do, kind of wrapping up the 7 churches. But before we get there, any questions on Church of Laodicea? No? Okay, let's wrap up with a few things here. And that's a list of pros and cons. I don't remember who I got this list from. That's not great. I should have written it down. I try to give credit where credit's due. I mean, like, for instance, a lot of this stuff I'm learning with you guys. I've gotten a lot from Craig Keener, Craig Blomberg, Johnson was his name. Alan Johnson, maybe? I don't remember. Ramsey, I already mentioned him. I've gotten a lot from a lot of different people, but this is not one of those areas that is my, what's it called, is it forte, my repertoire? My strong suit. My strong suit is ancient history. This is not that. So I am learning along with you guys. But so whoever I got this from, I'm not very familiar with New Testament scholars. I know the core, but this list that he gave, the pros of the in the churches. First off, the first pro is in Ephesus, vigilant work. In Smyrna, brave suffering. In Pergamum, courageous witness. In Thyatira, discipleship. In Philadelphia, brave steadfastness. Now the cons in those churches, and I've written these all down on your notes there. Abandoning your first love, Ephesus. Indifferent to heresy, Pergamum. Tolerant of immorality, Thyatira. Now, I want to be very clear. When I say immorality, I'm talking about sin, things that go against God. And obviously, there's a line between tolerance versus understanding. It's perfectly fine for a church to be understanding when people are, messing up and trying to seek the Lord and they're having a hard time of it, versus I'm living in sin and that's just how it is. Like, for instance, there was a porn star that was baptized just this last week, I think, and she said, "I'm not going to stop making my videos," but she's being baptized. So it's like, well, what is that? What is that? What does that even mean? How can you? I don't know. The whole baptizing, you're being, going down in death, being raised up to new life. So how in the world can you do that and continue your immoral behavior? I don't think you can. So I'm a little bit confused. That would be where the line is. That would be tolerance versus understanding. Hey, I'm trying to get out of this lifestyle, but I keep messing up, and I just feel like maybe God's given up on me. See what I mean? That's understanding versus tolerance, versus, hey, don't even worry about it. Jesus loves you just how you are. You don't need to change or give that up. You just go ahead and keep doing it. So when I say tolerance of immorality, tolerance of sin, that's what we're talking about. Apathetic, just generally apathetic, that would be Sardis. Or loving riches, not the Holy Spirit, Laodicea. So what I do is I go over this list, and we're going to get to the reflection here in just a minute. We're not going to do a group discussion tonight. We're going to have a reflection. And just real quick, is I read through these and I say, okay, of the things that he took time to praise these churches for, what is something that I need to grow in from that list? I don't have to work on all of it. Just pick one thing. okay, now on these churches that he found one thing against, what's one thing one area I need to grow? So maybe I am indifferent to heresy, like Pergamum. Okay, so maybe I can spend some time just focusing on that letter and just kind of, memorizing the scripture and that kind of stuff. Now, something that is an important aspect of their life back then, but is also an important aspect of our life, is that religious things, religious aspects, they are oftentimes tied into social aspects. So like what that looked like for them, for the ancient world, is they would have emperor worship, but you could still be a Christian and also worship the emperor. This is okay. If you were in a cult and you converted to Christianity, that cult would be like, yeah, you can still like do your thing with us, that's fine. And so in that world, this wasn't that far. Now, in our world, it would be like maybe, for instance, how feminism doesn't really mix well with Christianity. And right there, whenever I say that, people say, you don't think women should be able to vote? You don't think that women are valuable? I didn't say any of that. But modern-day feminism is more about how it's okay for women to murder babies because it's self-empowerment. And so they need to, get on social media and talk about how they murdered their baby and brag about, hey, I had an abortion, woo me. And it's like, that's not even what I'm about. So, I mean, when I'm talking about feminism, that's what I'm talking about, where it's like this bitter, spiteful, man-hating thing where, we don't need no man. And that's not what God intended at all. So when it comes to that would be a good example of how you can't really be that and Christian at the same time. But in our world, we're taught that we can. We can be feminist and Christian. And it's the same thing. It's just a whole different culture, but it's the same thing. So Christian over politics, over groups, over cults, beliefs, philosophies, so on and so forth. And that takes us to the reflection question. And I know we're getting real close to 8. That's why I'm trying to plow through. And this is something you are not answering out loud. This is not something for you to share with anybody. But I want you to take some time, and if you can't remember all 7 churches tonight, that's okay. You can do this activity at home. But I do want to strongly encourage you to do this. Look over the 7 churches, and I've given you these handouts, so it has all the different stuff on them. And just basically ask yourself the question, which of these 7 do I most relate to? And, am I like, so for instance, am I Philadelphia, where, I got everything and I'm doing all right. I'm doing good. Am I Laodicea, that I'm rich but I'm pretty dead inside? Am I Smyrna, that hey, I'm doing my best, but persecution is probably gonna come smacking me upside the head? And what do I do with that? Do I whine and complain? Like, how do I handle this? So go over the 7 churches and just kind of ask yourself that question: which of these do I most relate to? I know there's like 2 or 3, but I kind of just if that's gonna be you, then what I would recommend you do is just kind of focus on one of those 2 or 3, and just spend like a month or 2 in it, and just read through it every week. Read through that letter every week, and just keep it in your mind and be thinking about it. And as you're reading it, pray and ask God, how can I, what can you help me with this? What can you help me grow through this? So, like I say, this isn't something I would encourage you guys to say out loud. This is more something for your own personal time of devotion and reflection. But so what we looked at tonight is we've to this point, as we've gone through the prologue, we've gone through the 7 churches, and we will start next week on chapter 4, which is basically the calm before the storm. So any questions on any of this? No? Okay, so next week's going to be kind of like the calm before the storm, where we look at really quickly the present reality in heaven before things start going towards that landslide, and it starts catching more and more speed until the time of Jesus' return, and things get kind of just more and more intense there throughout the book. As far as upcoming opportunities, we are looking into getting involved with the school. So if there's somebody who would like to get involved with this, gift baskets for the school, it's not something you'd have to sign up for every single month. It's not something you really have to talk to people. So if this is something that interests you, let me know. Other than that, we're good to close out. Terry, would you mind closing us prayer? One day I'll get Todd to teach me his tricks. Melissa, can you close in prayer?